This episode of The Unstarving Musician is powered by liner notes. Learn from the hundreds of musicians and industry professionals I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician on topics such as marketing, songwriting, touring, sync licensing, and much more. Sign up for liner notes at unstarvingmusician.com. It's an email newsletter from yours truly in which I share some of the best knowledge gems garnered from the many conversations featured on The Unstarving Musician. You'll also be privy to the latest podcast episodes and liner notes subscriber exclusives. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. Welcome to another episode of The Unstarving Musician. I'm Rabonzo. This is my podcast. It features conversations with independent music artists and industry professionals with a few relevant special topic episodes featuring yours truly, all intended to help independent music artists better understand the marketing, business, and creative processes that power us to do more of what we love, make music. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Is this thing on? Testing. Just kidding. I know I'm coming through, and I'm grateful to you for choosing to listen again, or for the first time. It's almost February. I have a gig tomorrow night as I record this in a new ensemble that's a blues thing with a touch of rock and soul at a lovely venue called Moser Cafe Culture in Querétaro, Mexico. Honored to debut my latest project at Moser Cafe because they host some truly great local acts, so it's going to be a lot of fun. The Unstarving Musician needs your support. You can support us in many ways. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can tell a friend about the podcast. That would be amazing. Or you can visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor or the show notes for this episode to learn about the many, many ways of offering your devoted support. And we appreciate it. Before I get to my guest for this episode, I want to let you know that Americana swing music artist Dean Johannesson, who has made many appearances on this podcast, has a new CD out. It's called Cautionary Tales, and he has a CD release party very soon, February 4th of 2023, this glorious year, which I assume is the official release date on which you can find it on his website and all the streaming platforms. I got a sneak preview over the holidays, and it is great. Visit his website, deanjohannesson.com, link in the show notes, because Johannesson is not spelled like you would expect. Or you can search him, Dean Johannesson, Cautionary Tales. I bet you can find him that way. To learn more about his CD, Cautionary Tales, to hear it, or to buy it. Yeah, buy it. He would love that. It's got beautiful artwork. It is a cool package. My guest for this episode is Nashville singer, songwriter, country artist Dariann Leigh. She is described as red carpet glam and camo in a tree stand, big city beauty and small town humility. I love that. As a kid, Dariann says, I remember closing my eyes, plugging my headphones in, and listening to tracks that ended up being the theme songs to my daydreams. I want to be that artist for someone else. I know that feeling, Dariann. It has been said of Dariann's voice and stage presence. Big voice. I book anthem singers all year long. Dariann Leigh is the best, hands down. That is from John Praska. He's the GM of CJHL Norskies. And also said about her, stage presence and vocals will have you melting. Wonderful to work with. That's from Jeff Kroll, Marshall County Talent Fair Board. Dariann and I spoke during the holiday season, and she was looking forward to celebrating with family, as was I. In this conversation, we talk about her newest songs, pursuits in pop among country artists, creating a sound, songwriting and journaling, documenting lyrics and hooks, how theater influenced her, being a solo artist, her many media features, her New Year release strategy, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Here is me talking to Dariann Leigh.
Hello.
Oh, nice hat.
Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Good, doing good.
Are you in Nashville today?
I am.
Tell me your Nashville story. Like, when did you get there? How, why, the trials and tribulations, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I actually only moved to Nashville a year ago. I traveled back and forth for about 4 years between Minnesota and Nashville, Airbnbs, hotels, you name it. And then of course COVID happened, and that kind of threw a wrench in my plans to get here when I was planning to. But ended up moving officially about a year ago. And honestly, just fell in love with Nashville. It was a little overwhelming at first. I'm from a very small town, so more than a couple hundred people is weird at first. But you get used to it, and it's been really great, actually.
I bet. Yeah, Nashville's a nice place. So what was it like other than being so much smaller? What was it like, or what is it like? I should say, what was it like growing up there in Carlstad?
Very much so what everyone thinks of the small town sort of situation. Like the things that you see on TV about small towns and you imagine, very much so true. Just take the small town and like minus it by about a half and then a half of that. And then you've pretty much got growing up in my small town in Minnesota.
So was it what was the most overwhelming thing about getting to Nashville or Nashville when you got there?
Oh man, I think for me it was honestly driving, which sounds so weird because I've had the blessing of traveling throughout my life. But getting used to the driving in Nashville was the one thing that I wasn't expecting to take such a week or something to get used to, and maybe even more than that in some circumstances, but it definitely took a little time. I grew up in a no stoplight town. There's plenty of stoplights here.
I can totally relate to the driving culture shock. My wife and I have moved around a few times between major cities and also countries, and yes, it's an adjustment no matter where you are.
Really is. And plus you have to get used to how the people around you in that area drive, because that whole thing is very true about how different areas of the country and the state drive a little bit differently.
Yeah, when I grew up, I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, but I grew up in Arlington, and will be spending some time there for Christmas. But when I go back, it's just grown so much since we left, and when I go back, the driving's a little terrifying to me.
Some people just drive very aggressively.
Yeah, I just try and Uber as much as possible or get a ride. So I listened to this morning. I was listening to "Let Me Go," 10,000 Miles, and Jackson. I like them. I like the production. You're welcome. Jackson is a lot more has a much more country feel to me, and I don't mean that as bad or good or anything. I just noticed it. I
Yeah.
was listening to the other two, thinking, "Wow, these are really pop. You have a pop sensibility in your voice, and then I suppose the song productions were a little more so for me." But tell me about the inspirations for these songs, and maybe work your way back from latest to whichever one of those was first.
Let Me Go was one that I really wanted to release something that just sounded big and sounded at the time honestly like bigger than myself, bigger than something I thought I was capable of, and just loud and in your face, but in the right mixture of ways. And not something too much, but just that right in between. And I sat down with Sky Claire and Emily Fortney, and we just got to talking and really just about what I wanted and the sound that I wanted to create. And we made this piece of art really that was so different from anything I've released, but it really kind of set the ground for what I wanted my sound to be and what I still would like to be. And it was really just one of those things where the song I think speaks so much for itself. And following that up with the likes of Leave, 10,000 Miles, Jackson. Jackson was really the one where I felt I wanted to maybe try to hit back at my roots and do something a little bit more country. I haven't always done a true, if you want to call it a true country sound. I tend to lean a little bit more pop, like you're saying. And it was something where I was like, the people want country. I'll give it a shot and we'll see how it goes. And it was a song that I'd been sitting on for a while, so it only seemed natural to release a song that everyone had loved so much, and everyone was asking for something more country. And I like to give the people what they want.
I've talked to and listened to, it feels like a handful of country artists in recent months. And over the years that I've been doing the podcast, and I get this feeling that many of you are internally pursuing more pop sound. What do you? I have some theories about that, or a theory about that. But what do you? Um, can you pinpoint why that might be happening across at least a swath of country artists?
Yeah, I think that there's artists from earlier on, I guess, in my generation, like Shania Twain, and even further back. There's so many artists in country music that were kind of pushing country music to be something more. And it's not to say that true, straightforward country isn't enough, because it very much so is. But I think some people are just driven by a little bit of a different sound. And like I grew up with the Shania Twain and the Carrie Underwood and all of that. And so I think I've always kind of had an inclining to go towards music that feels like that for me, as much as I did grow up with Loretta Lynn and Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and all of them. I think I just have a internal liking towards something that is just a little bit more edgy to it.
Do you get most of that pop influence from country artists that lean that way, or are there pop artists outside of the genre that have also been a big influence?
Yeah, I kind of go all over the place. I'm the youngest of four, so I grew up with a lot of different tastes of music in my house, whether it be pop to pop to rock to literally anything you can name, Broadway musical music. I grew up with just about every single little bit of all of those genres. And I think for me, I just grew up so much liking, like I grew up in the very huge Britney Spears era and enter Gwen Stefani and everyone into that. And I think that the liking that I had for the statements that people like even BB Rexa now, Halsey, you name them, are able to make in their music just seems so huge, but also is so subtle in a way that it's got some sort of like taste in it that I've always loved. Insert a little bit of like a country blend into that. And I think we've obviously seen a lot more of that shift in country music with a little bit more pop. I think right now we're actually seeing more of a shift towards more country sounds. And it's kind of, I think, just finding yourself wherever you think you blend.
Sure. Did you just mention a couple of new artists in there?
Maybe.
Okay. I'm like, maybe I better write these down. It could be someone I need to check out. If they come to mind, if you did, let me know. You did say something about wanting to create this piece of art as maybe it was part of the sound that you're pursuing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, for Let Me Go and just in all music for me, it's just about wanting to create something that feels right in all of the ways where it kind of like validates the different emotions that you feel towards that song. So Let Me Go, it was very much so geared by like a relationship and kind of wanting to like scream out, and I felt the production of that song really kind of was that like scream of an emotion. And you kind of follow that up with things like Jackson that are very soft and somber and very singer songwriting, which is very much my roots. And I just think the whole thing is about giving that true raw emotion.
Did you resolve anything in terms of the relationship through the song?
Oh, absolutely. I think like writing a song is like a journal entry. You write it down, you can close the book, and you can kind of put it back in the cupboard, put it back in the shelf, and you just feel so much better afterwards. And I think that for me, it's definitely a source of validation, whatever you want to call it, and being able to close that chapter and put it away officially, like in my mind.
You just mentioned journals. Do you do much journaling these days? And I'm kind of curious to know if there are things about your song development or maybe a single development of a single, a release. Are there things that you do that are probably behind the scenes? And maybe it's anything from, shuffling papers to, keeping reference notes of things that inspired you. Did you have anything like that? And is journaling maybe any part of that?
Yeah, my entire life, I've been an avid journaler, I guess, if you want to call it that. No, I just think it's a beautiful way of being able to kind of process what you're thinking in a way that maybe isn't so, if you don't want to conversationalize it with other people, you can just write it down, shut it, be done. And I've always found it so interesting because I can easily start a song while I'm journaling without even really thinking about it because I just use it as like a rambling place. Like just get everything out, whatever, good, bad, everything in between, ramble it out, turn the page, whatever. And it's very much so something that I think has always fostered new songs and sometimes even like channeled older songs that I've released or haven't released. But sometimes there are a lot of songs born in those journal entries that I'll look at it right after and be like, okay, I'm gonna write this down in my notes and put this as like a possible hook or like this is a possible this. And yeah, it's very interesting how you can create a song without always even thinking about it. But there's definitely songs born through journaling.
As part of that, do you have ways that you organize your thoughts throughout the development of a song or songs where, for instance, you mentioned you noted something that you noticed about a song. And I'm just kind of curious, like from a point of reference or perhaps something where you're keeping things for ongoing inspiration. Do you have any sort of systems, I guess, that you use for that?
Honestly, everything is kind of a little bit different, which isn't always the most organized. I'm a very organized, put together person, but sometimes it's just I feel like art can be so interesting in the ways where it doesn't always have to be clear cut and visible and tangible in the moment. It can be something very much just a highlight in the book. I always try to take things from my journal, like I was saying, and like put them in my notes. So I have like an ongoing note in my phone with all the different things I'd like to write about or different random ideas. Maybe if I'm in a write and we're looking for the right lyric, and I can look through that and be like, well, I have these from I don't remember when, but I have all these lyrics or hooks or whatever that we can reach from. And it's definitely a really nice tool to have because it feels like you're kind of reaching almost into a scrapbook and grabbing something from a different piece and place and time and adding it to different works of art.
Yep, I can see that. I'm getting ideas and inspiration from you to like do this for myself. I want to know about your theater background and also the Jackson mini docu-series.
That has been really fun to share with people just because I think so much of it was stuff that I had never really talked about before, not in any sort of like calculated reason behind it, but just truly like sometimes you don't find your life as interesting as other people will. And it was cool to have like my videographer was in town. He's like, tell me about all the random things you did growing up. And then we're gonna figure out which ones we should pinpoint and share all about it. And yeah, theater was one of those things, and it's where we ended off the whole doc, just talking about the time that I grew up on the stage and more of a theater production and less of a musical production, and how I found myself in that walk of life. And it was really a place where I did find myself. And I think a lot of people can go to something like the arts and walk away feeling like they found maybe a different version of themselves that they didn't feel they had found before. It was very cool to be able to go back to it, but also to be able to share that kind of different chapter of my life.
How do you find the theater experience lends itself to what you do musically or perhaps as a performer?
I honestly think it kind of gave me a clearer picture of what I wanted at a very young age. And if even not having that, it also just gave me a lot more confidence, which I know isn't always how some people feel when they walk on a stage. For me, I was a very quiet kid. I was very timid, and was not very confident in any way, shape, or form. And for some reason, finding that on the stage was all I needed to kind of open up and be able to be the most true version of myself. And it's weird to say that you aren't a true version of yourself as a kid because I think we always are, especially as kids. There's that innocence there. But I think it was really for me just kind of an opening up experience of finding myself and being willing to kind of put yourself in vulnerable positions because being on stage in front of people at a very young age can be very scary. But like I was saying, you have that childlike innocence where you're like, this is just so fun. And just kind of growing up and prospering in that was huge for me. And especially doing what I do now.
Do you do some performances as a solo gig or artist?
Yeah, I actually do them. I grew up doing them from high school up until moving here. And I did band stuff and full things like that. But every once in a while we throw in a solo gig, and it kind of reminds me a lot of like the monologue moments in theater.
Do you find comparable facets of that to theater that perhaps challenge your confidence or have in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being able to honestly like being able to stand alone on a stage, I think is a huge thing. And that's happened in many different ways, whether it be the anthem or singing in a performance, or I've even like emceed things in my life. And I think that growing up doing those sorts of things on stage through another character was huge in showing me that I myself, my own character, if you want to call it that,
Hmm,
I can also do those things.
nice. Have you ever known anyone who sort of does this in reverse of what you have, where they start out in music and then find themselves in theater?
I have met so many different people that I just feel like everyone's different lives are so interesting, because I have met people that start out in music and go for theater, and start in music or start in theater and go for music, kind of like I have. And it's very interesting because it's like in another life, I feel like some of these people and I would have been like best friends in high school, best friends growing up, and even now. And it's so interesting to hear about everyone's different stories.
I can imagine. So I was trolling your Instagram this morning and I saw a story about you dropping a snare drum down a stairwell or something. It looked like maybe you were talking about high school.
Yes. We used to, it's a small town. There's a hockey arena that our basketball team was playing at, which I know sounds very opposite, but they cover the ice. It's a basketball thing. It's one of the bigger places that you can play for like a tournament in my area. And our pep band was there. And if you played in band, you were also in pep band in my school. And so we all went. I'm carrying the snare drum and I picked it up, and the snare fell all the way down every single step. And my band teacher just so happened to ironically be standing right at the bottom of those steps. And as I was looking at that and processing that, there was no way I could stop it. He was also looking at it and looking at me and processing that there's no way either of us could stop it. And this thing was just going to continue to fall down. I don't even know how many different steps. It was so many. And it was very loud and it was very quiet in there. So it was very much so a not so awesome moment, but turns out to be at this point very funny to think about.
Did the drum survive and was it in a case?
It was not in a case, but it did survive. I don't know how differently it was built. We did not think it was going to be okay. It was a standard drum and it was perfectly fine, miraculously.
It rolled just so.
Oh, perfectly. I can still see it. It was like slow motion. And seeing his face, I was like, okay, now he knows it was me that did it. So this is going to be even worse. But we were both just like, can you really believe that that happened? And how the heck did it happen? And it's fine. So no one, he was the last person that would ever get upset about something like that. But obviously didn't want the instruments to be injured or compromised in any sort of way. But it was just fine. So it really ended up being something that we laughed about and we're like, how did that even happen? And the irony in him being directly at the bottom of the steps staring at it as I was at the top of the steps staring down.
I'm remembering. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but a friend, bandmates always want to help the drummer usually, and I
Yeah.
remember a bandmate losing a grip on my bass drum, which was in the case at the top of a flight of stairs going out of my then apartment, and watching it roll down. And it was a flight case, so it was kind of a flexible, hard shell but flexible case. And this is like a fairly large maple kick drum, and it did not damage the drum, but the hardware took a small dent, but it
Right.
survived. I imagine because that one was so heavy and the snare drum was just so light.
Right. And obviously it has all the snares on it and it just was it sounded in a way that I never expected a snare drum to sound in any sort of fashion. Because we would just like, if you played in percussion, you would just play the snare and a cymbal, and people would like rotate onto the kit. And it was very much one of those things where I was like, that was my favorite drum that our school has, and I really hope it's okay.
Do you still play drums?
I don't. It looks very fun, but I do not think I'm well practiced enough anymore.
Well, it's never too late.
No,
You play guitar? Any other instruments?
I grew up playing piano a little bit. I don't know if grew out of it is the right way to say it, but I just kind of let go of piano after a little while. So I don't remember a whole lot, but I can sit down and play a few songs. But yeah, guitar is kind of my main instrument.
Nice. Tell me about the animal shelter tour.
Oh, yes, the Animal Shelters tour. It's so special. I grew up around many different dogs, cats, and all things alike growing up. And it really just kind of felt like second nature. When I started working with my team, they asked me what I loved, and we went through animals, and it really just became natural to stop when I was in a different city and go to their local animal shelter and try the best that I can to share that animal shelter on my social media. And honestly, word of mouth was also huge and is also huge, and just sharing, their need for whether it be foster homes or adoption. And it has been very cool and also rewarding to see how that has changed the lives of even families, and not in any way where I think I did it all. It's just making people aware of an animal that maybe might be their forever pet, and it's very cool to be able to be a part of that.
Is that something that you joined, or was an existing tour, or were you one of among the organizers?
It was really just something that we kind of started. Basic, like I was saying, if I was in a town and they had an animal shelter, we'd reach out and ask if we could just drop in and try to share them on social media in hopes to help garner some fosters or adoptions, or even just likes, follows, how all of that goes, just some attention towards them. So really it was just kind of a organic sort of thing that we had started.
And was it in conjunction with some performing or touring about that you were doing, and you'd make these side stops to visit them and try and share them?
Exactly, a side stop, something where we were there, why not look for what's going to be around us at that time and make some hours of good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I saw that you've had a number of features, and probably the ones that stand out to most people are PBS and CMT. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about those? Not necessarily those specifically, but the features that you've had, and perhaps the ones that might stand out as most memorable, and how it came about that you obtained the feature.
It is always so different, which is something that even now takes so much being able to let things go and just let them happen how they're supposed to be, because truly it always seems to be so different. Like the PBS thing was, they someone that worked at the PBS saw me playing a show, and this is many many years ago at this point, and they asked me like, have you ever seen the Prairie Musicians thing? And at that time I had never seen it, but I'd heard of it. And they're like, we'd love to have that's very cool, but you never know if word of mouth things are actually going to happen, because people like to tell you they can do all these things and you aren't always sure if it's going to work out, especially when it comes to scheduling, and also if it's just even going to happen. And it was one of those things where I was like, it'd be really cool if it did happen. I'm not sure if it will, but I'd really love it if it would. And we stayed in this freezing cold hotel. It was freezing cold in Fargo, North Dakota. And we went in, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've had, especially at such a young age, to be able to be around a production that was so professional and where everyone is like truly valuing each other as a teammate. And I don't know, it's just very eye opening to the different things that you can do while just being a musician and doing this. And the CMT thing was very much just something my team sent over and was like, hey, CMT has interest in this. They want to do a feature, and basically asking how I felt about it. And I was like, I'm very much so okay with this. Let's go ahead.
They're not like, you should do this.
Right. Like, so we have this little thing, and I know what's coming when they say like a little thing, and they're like, it's just CMT. And I was like, you what? What are you talking?
What was the most maybe unusual one that you've done?
Ooh, very much so in the beginnings of just kind of like working, I would say, professionally as a musician, however you want to take that. But very young, little green, and trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And magazine reached out and asked to do like a feature on me going to Nashville. And obviously, I'm like shell shocked. This is the coolest thing ever. I'm very much so still beginning. And even now, I would think it's very cool, but very much so in the beginnings where everything is just so new and cool and trying to understand this world that I'm dipping my toes into and in fact, like throwing myself into. And they asked all these questions. They shared, I shared photos, and then we came back like months later and like kind of re-updated it. And the next thing I knew, this magazine is shipped out to every single person in this town, and then also like abroad that town, as much as you want to call that abroad. It was so interesting. And also, like, I didn't know that so many people read this magazine. I was so unaware of how many people read it and how many people received it and the kind of numbers that played into that. Like, I was just very innocently going into it thinking it was just going to be this cool little thing, and it ended up being so much bigger than I thought it would, and it was very unexpected but very cool.
What magazine was that?
Grand Lifestyle magazine. It's out of Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Nice. North Dakota. Must be
Yeah,
freezing up there.
very much so. It's like an hour and a half away from my hometown.
My goodness.
It's so crazy because everybody I know in my hometown knows so many people there. And I don't even know, like 18, and my face is smack dab on the front. And I was like, this is so wild. And I don't even think I got one until like a month later when I was doing some modeling work for someone. And they're like, hey, we have your magazine. Would you like it? And I was like, I haven't even been able to see it in physical form. So I would love to.
Nice. I'm going to read a couple of quotes about what I would say is about your stage presence.
Yeah.
So the first one is big voice. I book anthems, singers all year long. Dariann Leigh is the best, hands down. That's from John Praska, GM of CJHL Norskies. Did I say that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other one is stage presence and vocals will have you melting. Wonderful to work with. And that's from Jeff Kroll, Marshall County Talent Fair Board. And there were lots of others. I wanted to read those and ask you what inspires you to have the particular style of stage presence that you do.
Oh man. I grew up watching like all different walks of life and music performances, theater, like we've been talking about, and whether it be from Broadway to watching like the Vans Warp Tour videos online. And I think I got such a huge love for that energetic on stage performance that just feels like out of body in a way. My bass player is always like, he's like, you're an energizer bunny, and I don't really understand how, because you're running around so much that I don't know how you're still like breathing and running. And I honestly don't know either sometimes, but I don't know. I just like to have so much fun. But there's also those like somber moments where I like live out my Broadway dreams, if you want to call it that. And it is just something that like I want people to walk away and be wowed, but also to have felt like they've experienced something so cool. And I also want to feel that same way. And I just know that every performance is important. So I like to treat it like it's exactly that.
Nice. Yeah. How are you doing on time? You have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, all good.
All right. Tell me something about yourself that few of your fans or maybe even friends know about you.
Oh, that's hard. Especially since the Jackson docuseries. I feel like I've opened up a whole new can of worms. Hmm. I'm not sure. I feel like I'm such an open book, which is great. And sometimes I'm like, I need to slow down a little bit. I would say I mean, everyone obviously knows that I'm singing and all this. I don't think a lot of people realize that the first song that I ever sang out was a Leanne Rimes tune.
Nice. I haven't heard that name in a while.
No, I know. And I was such a big name for me for quite some time. I know that's probably not where you expected me to go, but that's about the only thing I could think of.
It's all free game. Open-ended question. Are there, is there anything about music or life that you've changed your mind about? Something maybe you thought when you were younger or maybe even last year, but you think differently about today?
Oh, absolutely. I think I always wanted to have, and you've kind of seen that in the change with Jackson. I always wanted to have like a sound and stick to it, but now I just kind of feel a lot more open to just trying whatever feels right at the moment, even if it's not necessarily the demographic that I have or the maybe even the interest there for like in the fans. Maybe they're not interested in that exact genre of things, but honestly now I just kind of feel like I'm still starting out, so I feel like I have so much around me that inspires what I do, which will never change, but there's not much reason I feel like to be very steel-footed in a specific sound. I feel like I can very much so dabble and do different things, and I'm very much so looking forward to doing more of that in the future.
Well, speaking of the future, and we'll close on this, what are your plans for the new year musically?
Yeah, I've got a single coming out in the first quarter, so little fun fact, I guess. And I'm currently writing for the next single of next year. So that one is still in the works. So it could very much so be inspired by anything happening these days.
Oh, nice. What's the last one this for real this time? What's the what is your release strategy moving into next year? You mentioned two singles. Is that sort of the goal, a certain number of singles, or how do you do it?
Right now, it's just, I feel like we live in such a single world where you can see something go crazy on TikTok and quick turnaround and get it out for people, and then they're like, okay, what's next? And you're sitting there like, well, it takes a while to make music, but it's like, for me, I'm kind of just honestly willing to do and open to nearly whatever these days. I've always had a pretty strategized plan of this many singles, we're going to put this, and this behind it. And these days, I still like to have it very organized and very ready to go well before it needs to be out. But I kind of am just open at this point to anything that will work or anything that just seems fun. So even if it is something that TikTok rules over the world and tells you that you need to release it yesterday, I will do my best.
Very nice. Sounds exciting. Well, Darian, I wish you the best over the holiday season and in the new year. I'm sorry that I'm going to miss you while I'm in Nashville, or at least miss the opportunity to see you perform. But maybe next time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
If you do not yet have a website for your music, check out Bandzoogle. It was created to help musicians and bands build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle features amazing design options, a commission-free store to sell merch, music, tickets, and you get detailed fan data. And there's more. Try it free at bandzoogle.com. Use the promo code ROBONZO, that's ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. You've been listening to The Unstarving Musician with Robonzo. That's me. Please follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links and mentions for this episode at unstarvingmusician.com. Thanks again for listening. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love.